Hi, and welcome to your video workshop this week. So first I'll start with what we discussed last week. So last week we looked at pre-production and talked about the stages of production. And most importantly, we talked about how to get to an idea, an inspiration. We also discussed style and mode and how to look at Bill Nichols' 6 modes, which was one of the readings we did. And then we considered the overall style and feel we want for our documentaries. Lastly, we had a quick look at editing software for different needs that you have, and had a look at what a basic video interface was. So this week, we're going to look at 3 areas: how to conduct an interview, compiling footage, and editing basics. So just to reiterate from last week, we looked at different types of editing software. Hopefully you've had the chance to experiment, have a look around online, and also watch some tutorials on how to use some of the editing software. And again, this is what the interface will typically look like for whatever software you choose. Some may be more simplified, others might have some of the windows in a different arrangement. If you click onto Google Docs on this slideshow, you'll find a glossary of film terms I've put together for some of the language that we have been and will be using in the course. There's also a link on Schoology. So first of all, I want to talk about the interview. So not everyone's going to be doing an interview for your documentary, but a number of people have expressed an interest. So it's worth putting it in today's workshop so that you'll know how to do it, how to conduct an interview. And secondly, if you don't, you'll have an idea of what the steps are if you choose to do one in the future. So the first thing you want to do is secure permissions. So that's making sure that your subject is aware of what your documentary is about, who the audience will be, and where it will be shown. One way you can get permission is to get it written down and signed. Another form of permission is on-air permission, and this is what I typically tend to do, or sometimes I do both. But one thing I do is I hit record right before the interview, and I use their name and my name, and I state I'd like to have your permission to use this interview footage for a documentary I'm putting together for class. And then they can then say that they agree. That way you have it online and you keep that footage. You don't necessarily use it in your documentary, but it's there for you. The second thing I want to talk about in the interview is questions, our questions. So questions, of course, are to be done ahead of time, and hopefully this is something, if you're doing an interview, something you've already put some thought into. One important thing is always to provide your questions ahead of time for your subject. Much like any kind of data research where you're doing interviews, you want your subjects to have a good sense of what kind of questions, which direction this interview is going, and so they can prepare somewhat. They can also be made aware that some of the questions might change a little bit over time, or questions might be expanded a little bit too. When you're developing your questions, it's really important to avoid yes or no responses. So make sure that they'll have something to answer to that's more than just a sentence. And when you're doing the interview, always ask your subject to do a couple of things for you. So number one is, after you ask the question on or off camera, have them pause for about 5 seconds. This is for editing purposes. And then ask them to repeat the question in the answer. For example, if you ask the question, how long have you been playing soccer? They can respond by, I've been playing soccer for about 8 years now. I started on a school team in university. That way, when you're editing, you don't just have someone saying 6 years. Equipment check. So equipment check is really important. Again, this interview process can be as simple as an iPhone or camera or phone, or it can be as technical as a tripod, a proper camera, a separate microphone, etc. So it really depends on what equipment you have. Remember that you can borrow equipment from Education Commons on the 3rd floor. I strongly suggest the use of a tripod. If you're using your phone to record the interview, it's a good idea to maybe prop your phone up somewhere on a table at eye level so that your phone isn't moving around too much. Always check that you have enough battery space and time for your interview. And of course, be sure that you have storage space. There's nothing worse than running out of space and not having the interview finished. So if you have an SD card or you're using some sort of space on your phone, just make sure that you have enough. Now, typically, if you're using a point-and-shoot camera, a video camera, a phone, you're going to have an on-camera microphone. However, there are some circumstances where you can record the audio separately. I tend to do that, and I use a small device called a Rode recorder. And it's basically a tiny little lavalier mic that you can clip onto someone's shirt, and you can connect it to your phone and record it separately. These little recorders are less than $100. They're fantastic. You can find one to borrow, you can actually rent them as well. But again, you can also keep it simple and keep it free by just using what equipment that you do have. When you're setting up your shoot, there are some conventions that are really helpful to follow. One of them I want to talk about is framing. So when you're setting up your camera for the interview, you'll want to make sure that you have a few things straight. So one of them is eye perspective. So you want to have, typically in a conventional interview, your subject will often look to the left or to the right of the camera, meaning that's where you stand. You stand to the left or the right of the camera if you're going to be off camera. So if they're looking to the left, just remind them to keep looking at you, the interviewer, and not back at the camera, because that can kind of look a little bit confusing, or it might look like shifty eyes. So just make sure that they stay trained on you for that purpose. It's also typical to use a medium shot when doing an interview. So a medium shot would be from the chest up and a little bit of headspace at the top. Again, you can crop this when you're doing your video editing and post-production, but it's really important to have good framing at the time of the interview so that you have enough to edit with later. Another important tip I give people when they're doing interviews is to have a chat with your interviewee first. You can keep the camera rolling or you can have it paused, but it's a good way to sort of get your subject comfortable with you, comfortable with the conversation. I know when I've been interviewed, I have been asked the same question 6 or 7 times, and they take the best take out of those. So it doesn't hurt to return to a question time and again until you get the kind of answer or the flow that you'd hoped for. The last little bit of advice is getting B-roll. So B-roll is great because it's like a band-aid that can cover up some little mishaps in interviews or something you want to cut away from. So B-roll could be, for example, someone watching the interview. It could be a close-up of your interviewee's hands. Or if you're interviewing a child and they're coloring, it could be a close-up of the drawing that they're doing. It could be a close-up of the room with a window, whatever you like, but it really is important to get a little bit of footage in and around the interview so that you have something to cut away to. So those are the main ideas I have for you if you're shooting an interview. Again, there are so many more suggestions and ways that you can do this. So I strongly encourage you to look online at some examples of interviews for documentaries. Even think to the news as you watch the news or anything else that you tend to watch with interviews, and look at how their setup is. Compiling footage. So for those of you who are using perhaps a blend of your own footage and footage that you find online, or if you've got interviews and footage and online footage, it's really important that you stay organized and note the source of everything that you use. Just like an academic paper, you're going to have to make mention of your sources in your credits. So if you find something fantastic that's public domain and you are able to access it, remember with any footage like that or stills, you do have to credit the source. So do make sure that you click on additional information and find out how that creator of that production would like to be sourced, because there are often different ways that they would like to be sourced. So I won't get into it too much here, but I do want to direct you to this link to my website, and I've got a full page on documentary film resources. And this is just something I've compiled over the past couple of years of great free sources for stills, for music, for sound effects, and for video. And I'm sure you're going to find it quite helpful. Now, it's not an exhaustive list. There are many other places to look, but this is simply a good beginning for you. The last thing I wanted to discuss is about audience. Sorry, not the last thing. Before I get to the editing, one of the last things I wanted to talk about is audience. We did touch on this in class last week, and how important it is to consider who our audience is. They are also known as our eventual viewer or our target audience. But it's always important to consider who will be watching this documentary. You can consider demographics and psychographics, for example, age, gender, class, race, where they live. Consider who would be interested in this documentary. Is it for your classroom at school? Is it for the school board? Is it for this class in particular? Is it for yourself? Is it for the world? Think about how you want to frame that. And it's also really important to consider that our audience is always active and our audience negotiates meaning. So as an audience, we are never just passive viewers of anything that we consume. We actually put our own meaning, we negotiate meaning, and we put our own meaning into what we see and hear and consume. The next quote, I think, is really important. We, the eventual viewers, arrive at documentaries once they are finished. They are addressed to us in various ways. Any viewer of a documentary, in whatever situation of viewing, has to find their way through the differently pitched communicative attempts of documentary subjects, of filmmakers, and of their commissioning organizations. The viewer or listener starts from that finished text at the other end of the process, yet we are all too aware that the process of textual construction has taken place, and because we watch documentaries to find proof, we will interrogate what we see in light of our knowledge and feelings about the process of production. Today's eventual viewer knows what it feels like to film and to be filmed. So I think this is really important to keep in mind when we consider our eventual viewer. Okay, now we'll get on to the editing. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about how to go from a rough cut to a final cut in the editing process. So this is a little bit of an outline of a typical editing order, but again, as the tip says on the right, many parts of the editing process are iterative, and you'll find yourself coming back to earlier stages to edit, delete, add, etc. So the first thing you'll do is you'll import or ingest your footage. So basically anything you've recorded from your phone or any archival footage that you've found online that you'd like to use, you're going to input into the editing software. The next thing that's a good idea is to organize your clips into bins. So for example, you might have one bin, which is basically another word for folder. One bin full of interviews, one with still images, one with sound, music, etc. Everyone organizes differently. Some people organize by segment, other people organize by file type. So that's up to you. The next part of the process typically is to select your best clips and images that you plan to use. And this can be done in a rough cut by dragging them down to your timeline, which I'll show you how to do, and cutting and arranging. So this really allows you to put things into order, move things around a little bit, and once you get something rough, again, this is really a brief overview, but once you get something rough and lined up, then it's a good opportunity to show it to someone else, share and get feedback, and hopefully you'll be able to do that with your peers in class or someone else who can help you. Once you get some feedback, it's an opportunity to trim down some more, so cut out what might not be needed, add what else you might have missed, and you're getting closer to your final cut, and at that point you'll start to work on other factors such as color. You might want to adjust color, you might want to desaturate, you might want to make some clips black and white. And then this is also an opportunity to add your music if you haven't already, any sound effects you want to add, voiceovers, etc. Graphics if you're using animation, that's an example. And usually the last stage is audio editing. So this is where you can fine tune all of your audio once you've locked down the video. And then at the end, very important, don't forget your credits. So earlier in this workshop, we talked about using sources and being sure to credit them, such as your interviewees or any footage you found online or anyone who's helped you in the filmmaking process. This is a great opportunity to add them into the credits. So that's a really quick overview, and next we'll have a look at some actual editing. So for this editing tutorial, I'm just going to use iMovie. Now this might look a little bit different for each of you using iMovie if you have different versions. So the version I'm using is iMovie 10.1.2, but there's a 0.4 as well right now. So typically when you open the first screen or open iMovie, if you haven't used it before, you'll likely get a screen like this. So you'll want to click on Create New, and it's going to give you an option here to make a movie or to select a template to create a trailer. So I'm going to go to Movie. And the first thing I'll want to do is give a title to my project. Okay, it'll take me back to this screen and I'll open my movie. And here I want to talk a little bit about the interface, which again, you can actually move around a little bit, but this is the standard interface when you open up the program. So over here in this area is the event browser, where my mouse is right now. And this allows you to view your imported media, which we haven't imported yet, which we'll do shortly. But here's where you go to review all of your footage. The next window here is your viewer. And this is where you can actually view your raw footage or your movie in progress. Now, this viewer actually allows you to do in-viewer editing. So you see here that you have cropping capabilities, lighting, color, camera stability, and other editing options here. So you'll be doing quite a bit in this window as well. Down here we have the project pane, and this, as it says, is where you drag and drop video clips and photos from the browser above for your movie project. Okay, so it's as easy as a drag down. And on the left side here you'll have libraries, and this is where you store your footage or photos or other media. Now going up here for a minute, you'll notice that I'm on my media right now. So I don't have any clips as of yet, but I also have an option to look at audio, and you'll see here that sound effects has come up, but also iTunes. So this is where you can use your music as well, or if you have GarageBand, which you likely do if you have on a Mac, you can create your own music and import it. Next we have titles. So titles are your credits, your lower thirds, your introduction title, all of that can be found here. A lot of them are quite, some of them are a little bit gimmicky and explosive and stuff like that, which you likely won't use, but they do have your typical scrolling credits, title with subtitle, lower thirds for when you want to give a title to someone you're interviewing, okay? And over here we have backgrounds, which you might not likely need for this, or for this project in particular, but again, you can have a look and use some of these backgrounds if you need them. And here we have transitions. So transitions are the little joiners between clips. So it's basically the most typical one is a dissolve or a straight cut. But if you just scroll through them, they show you what each of the transitions will look like. We typically don't use anything too complicated in documentary film, but you can have a look and explore and see what you think. Next thing I want to talk about is importing footage. So if we go back to my media, you'll notice here that you can actually import media directly onto the screen, but there are also other options here for importing media, and you can import directly from your camera, from your desktop, whichever you prefer. So to keep this simple, what I'm going to do is just drag a clip in from my desktop that I already have. Okay, and you'll see here that I've got my clip, which is me talking to my online class. You'll notice here that you've got on top, you have your video, and then below these little lines here, this is actually your audio. So this all comes together as one file. However, you can separate the audio and the video. Let's say you want to use just video and take the audio out and do some sort of voiceover, you have that option. Okay, so you'll notice here in my event browser, I have my clip, but over here in my viewer, I can see my clip and I can make some adjustments to it here if I like. Adjustments to saturation, color, etc. These I think it's a good opportunity to just experiment a little bit so you can have a look and do some cropping, etc. But let's say that I'm happy with what I have already. I simply take my clip, and I'm keeping my finger down on the mouse pad, and I just drag my clip down into the timeline. So now when I hit the space bar to play it. Hey everybody, welcome to week 30. It's nice to see you again. Okay, so now that you see here that I've got my clip, this is the length of the clip. Now I can actually shorten it or lengthen it here. Okay, so I can do some editing right inside the project pane. This is called the Playhead, and the Playhead basically brings you to each of the frames in your clip. Okay, I'm just going to go to audio because in the project pane you'll see that we have some space here, some gray space. What we call each of these are tracks. So right now I just have one track, and I can actually add more tracks as needed. So I'm going to show you how to add an audio track. So let's say I'll pick a song here. Let's say I want to use this song for my clip. I can actually just take my song down and I can figure out where I want it to go, and I can add it as its own track. So when I play, this is not going to sound good. So I would have to adjust my music and my audio a little bit. So what I'm doing right now is I'm boosting the audio from my clip and bringing down the music a little bit. Through a feminist lens, for example. Okay, so that's how that works. I'm just going to show you quickly how to do titles. So let's say that I want to introduce myself here and I want to use a lower third, which is typically used in an interview. You'll see that it appears right here, so I can edit here. Okay, put my name in. Or the other option is just to drag straight down. Okay, so you'll notice now that I've got my little title here. You can see in the viewer my title. Now you'll see 8.9. These are the seconds, so I could put the title in for the entire time. Wrap up for. So as I'll bring my Playhead over here. You'll see the title here. Or you can have it just for a short period of time. But that's basically how you put a title in. So I think I'm going to leave it here for now. These are just some really basic, I won't keep it on that frame. Oh dear, okay. So basically this is just some really, really simple instructions for how to import your video, what the interface looks like, but I strongly encourage all of you to have a look at some of the fantastic iMovie tutorials online, or if you're using a different piece of software, of course, you should be having a look at those tutorials. But in class, we'll have some time to do some editing together, but this is just hopefully enough to get you started so that you can get some footage inside of your software and get you playing around with it. Remember that this type of editing is non-destructive, meaning that any clip you bring in, you're not editing it permanently. You've just taken a copy of your clip and you've brought it into your editing software, but your original clip from your desktop or wherever you've taken it from remains raw. So don't worry, you can experiment as much as you like, which is what I suggest you do. Okay, good luck.